He ruled the American underground with precision and bloodshed. A Korean mafia boss whose name alone ended conversations. She was the one truth he erased, the only softness he ever allowed himself to feel. So he walked away to build his empire in darkness. Years of silence, years of control, until one ordinary afternoon in a Los Angeles shopping mall, his carefully constructed world detonates. She stands across polished marble floors in soft yellow, holding the hands of two identical little girls whose eyes carry his legacy. His wife walks beside him, oblivious. His past just shattered his present. And the man who built everything on emotional distance is about to fracture completely. This is the story of Lee Sung-yi, the mafia boss who thought his past was gone, and Sarah, the woman who raised his daughters in the shadows of his empire. Welcome to a love that never died. It just learned to survive without him. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another story that will break you open and remake you. Today's tale follows a Korean mafia boss who discovers the family he never knew existed and the impossible choice between power and redemption. But before we dive deep into this journey, if you're enjoying these stories, please take a moment to subscribe and help us reach our next milestone. Your support means we can keep bringing you stories that matter. Now, let's step into Lee Sung-yi's world and watch it burn. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. The shopping mall smelled like new leather and expensive ambition. Lee Sung-yi moved through it like a king surveying territory he didn't officially own, but everyone understood belonged to him anyway. Not the building, but the silence. The way security guards straightened when he passed, the way crowds instinctively parted, sensing the kind of man whose patience had limits and whose limits had consequences. At 34, he'd learned to wear control like armor. His fiancée, Flora, walked beside him in tailored black, her hand resting elegantly on his arm. The engagement ring on her finger caught the light from crystal chandeliers above. She was discussing their upcoming wedding, something about floral arrangements and destination venues. Seoul in spring, the kind of ceremony his empire demanded. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as he'd designed it. And then time fractured. Near the children's boutique on the second level, she appeared. Sarah. Dressed in soft yellow, standing near a display of small shoes, her silhouette backlit by glass walls streaming through afternoon sun. Same posture, same way of holding herself, strong but gentle, like she'd learned to carry worlds without breaking. His chest locked before his mind could catch up. 6 years evaporated. He was 28 again, standing in her apartment doorway at dawn, watching her sleep for the last time. He kissed her forehead, memorized the shape of her breathing, left before sunrise because his mentor's assassination meant the organization needed him, the family needed him, and love was a weapon enemies could use. He'd chosen the empire. He'd walked away from the only person who'd ever made him feel human. And he'd never looked back. Couldn't. Because looking back meant questioning everything he'd become. But now she was 30 feet away, and she wasn't alone. 2 girls flanked her. Identical. Couldn't be more than 5 years old. Dark hair pulled into matching ponytails, their laughter cutting through the mall's ambient music like bells. Sarah bent down, adjusting one girl's collar, her voice too soft to hear, but her smile exactly as he remembered it. Patient, warm, the kind of light he'd spent 6 years trying to forget. And then one of the girls turned. Sung-yi's entire body went cold. Her face. Jesus Christ. It was his face, Miniature, delicate, but unmistakable. The same dark, serious eyes, the same sharp focus even in a child's features, the exact angles of his own childhood photographs that his mother kept in frames he'd shattered years ago. The second girl looked up. Same eyes, same expression, same undeniable truth. Twins. His vision tunneled, the mall blurred into watercolor edges. Flora's voice about wedding flowers faded into static. The world collapsed into a single impossible reality crushing his chest. He had daughters. 2 of them. And he'd never known. His hand released Flora's arm without conscious thought. His feet moved on autopilot, carrying him like a man in a dream or a nightmare, he couldn't tell which anymore. "Sing-yi?" Flora's voice, confused, distant. He didn't answer, couldn't. Words were ash in his throat. Sarah straightened, guiding the girls toward the boutique entrance. She hadn't seen him yet. Her back was to him, shoulders squared in that way she had when she was exhausted but refusing to show it, when she was carrying everything alone. 20 feet? 10. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I would have stayed." One of the girls, the one with the more serious expression, turned around. Her eyes locked on his. For a moment, she just stared, confused, like looking into a mirror that shouldn't exist, trying to understand why a stranger's face felt like coming home. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, this collision of past and present in a Los Angeles shopping mall, we need to go back. Back to when Lee Sung-yi was just a man, not yet a legend. Back to when love still felt possible, before blood and power became the only language he spoke. Sung-yi didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. 2 small faces with his own eyes staring back. Sarah's hand instinctively pulling them closer, that flash of fear crossing her features before hardening into something else. Protection, determination, the look of a mother who'd learned to be both shield and sword. He'd left the mall in a daze, Flora's questions trailing behind him like smoke he couldn't grasp. He'd manufactured some excuse about business, a deal gone wrong, anything to explain why he'd frozen in the middle of a shopping corridor like a man who'd seen a ghost. But ghosts were supposed to stay buried. And Sarah was alive, breathing, raising his children in a city where his name carried weight in all the wrong places. He lay in the darkness of his penthouse, staring at ceiling shadows cast by Los Angeles lights, and let the memories flood in unchecked. Her laughter in that tiny apartment in Koreatown, the one with the broken heater and the view of nothing but brick walls. The way she'd insisted on cooking for him even though she worked double shifts at the hospital. The stubborn hope in her eyes when she'd tell him he could be more than what his world demanded. "You're not just this," she'd said once, tracing the tattoos on his forearm. "You're more than the weight you carry." He'd believed her then, almost. The night he'd walked away, she'd been sleeping. He'd stood in her doorway for 20 minutes, memorizing the curve of her shoulder, the way her breathing made the sheets rise and fall. He'd written no note, left no explanation, just disappeared like smoke, the way men in his world learned to do when love became a liability. His mentor had been executed, the organization was fracturing, and Sarah was the one soft thing in his life that enemies could use to break him. So he'd broken himself first. Dawn came without mercy. Sung-yi rose, showered, dressed in clothes that armored him back into the man he'd become. But his hands shook as he buttoned his shirt. His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger wearing his face. He made a decision that would have appalled the version of himself from 24 hours ago. He was going to find her. The elementary school was in Pasadena, a neighborhood of tree-lined streets and houses with gardens. Sung-yi sat in his car 2 blocks away, dark sunglasses hiding eyes that hadn't seen rest. He'd had his people locate her address by morning. It had taken them less than an hour. Sarah Mitchell now. She'd changed her last name, erased any connection to him. Smart. At 3:15 p.m., she appeared at the school gate. Same yellow dress from yesterday, or maybe a different one. Hair pulled back, no makeup, exhaustion written in the set of her shoulders. She waited with other parents, but stood slightly apart, the way she always had, never quite fitting into crowds. The bell rang. Children poured out like a breaking dam of noise and color, and then he saw them. Chloe and Zoe, according to the school records his people had pulled. They ran to Sarah with identical grins, backpacks bouncing, both talking at once in that overlapping way twins do. Sarah knelt, not bent down, fully knelt, bringing herself to their eye level. She listened to each girl in turn, nodding seriously at whatever earth-shattering 5-year-old crisis needed immediate attention. She fixed a loose shoelace, smoothed back hair that had escaped its ponytail, kissed both foreheads. No nanny in sight, no security detail, no town car waiting at the curb. Just her, just Sarah carrying everything alone, the way she'd always been strong enough to do. Something cracked open in Sung-yi's chest. He waited until nightfall, until after the girl's bedtime, lights dimming in the upstairs windows of the small house she rented in a neighborhood where his name meant nothing. He knocked softly. Footsteps approached, hesitant. The door opened a crack, chains still in place. Sarah's eyes went wide, then hard. "How did you—" She stopped, shook her head. "Of course you found me. That's what men like you do. I need to talk to you." "No." She started to close the door. "Please." The word felt foreign in his mouth. "Please, Sarah." Something in his voice stopped her, maybe the fracture in it, maybe the way his hands hung at his sides, empty of the threat she'd expected. She closed the door. The chain rattled. The door opened again. She stepped onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her, placing herself between him and whatever was inside worth protecting. "You have 5 minutes," she said quietly. "Then you leave and don't come back." Sung-yi's throat closed. All the questions he'd rehearsed evaporated. In the end, only one remained, the only one that mattered. "Are they mine?" Sarah's expression didn't change, didn't soften or harden. She just looked at him with those same eyes that had once seen past his armor. "Yes." The word was a bullet. "I found out 2 weeks after you disappeared. No note, no explanation, just gone, like I'd imagined everything we were. I tried to find you. Your phone was disconnected. Your apartment was suddenly occupied by people who said they'd never heard your name." "Sarah." "I was pregnant and alone, Sung-yi. I didn't know if you were dead or if you just decided I wasn't worth a goodbye." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "So I made a choice. I left the city, changed my name, built a life where my daughters wouldn't grow up wondering if their father was coming home in a body bag or handcuffs." Each word carved into him. "I wanted to protect you." "By abandoning me?" Fire flashed in her eyes. "By making me believe I meant nothing?" "You meant everything," he said, the words ripping out of him. "That's why I had to leave. My enemies would have—" "Your enemies," she had turned. "You chose that world, Sung-yi. You chose power and violence and everything that came with it. I chose our daughters." "I didn't know." Would it have mattered? The question hung between them like smoke. Would you have stayed, given up your empire for diapers and daycare and a life that ended in blood? He opened his mouth, closed it. The honest answer sat like ash on his tongue. Sarah saw it in his silence. "That's what I thought," she said softly. "They deserve a life without blood on their hands, Sung-yi. They deserve to sleep without fear, to grow up normal, to never know what you've done or what you've become." The words cut deeper than any knife he'd ever taken, deeper than any bullet, because they were true. "I'm not asking for anything from you," Sarah continued. "No money, no protection, no suddenly playing father. Just leave us alone. Let them grow up safe." She turned toward the door. "Sarah, wait." She paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't look back. "You made your choice 6 years ago," she said quietly. "Let me make mine now." The door closed, the lock turned, and Lee Sung-yi stood alone on a porch in Pasadena, the king of the underworld, powerless beyond measure, powerless to change the one thing that suddenly mattered. The warehouse in Vernon smelled like concrete dust and old blood. Sung-yi sat at the head of a steel table, surrounded by men who'd killed for him, who'd bled for him, who read his moods the way sailors read weather patterns. And tonight, they sensed a storm. "The shipment from Busan arrives Thursday," Kim, his second-in-command, was saying. "But the Russians are pushing back on territory lines. They want Koreatown expanded to include—" "Handle it." Sung-yi's voice came out flat, empty. Silence fell like a blade. Kim exchanged glances with Park, his enforcer. In 6 years, Sung-yi had never delegated the Russians, never handed off anything that mattered. Control was his religion. Details were his prayers. "Boss," Kim said carefully, "they're requesting a sit-down, with you specifically. If we send anyone else—" "I said handle it." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Park shifted his weight, hand instinctively moving closer to his waist. The other lieutenants went still, Predator sensing something wrong with the apex predator. Kim held Sung-yi's gaze for 3 seconds, longer than was wise, then nodded slowly. "Understood." The meeting continued, but the damage was done. Sung-yi could feel it spreading through the room like blood in water. Doubt, question, the first hairline fracture in the foundation he'd built with absolute certainty. For the first time in 6 years, Lee Sung-yi wasn't entirely present. Part of him was still standing on that porch in Pasadena, watching a door close on everything he'd never known he wanted. The rest of the week passed in a haze of fractured attention. He sat through meetings where millions moved like chess pieces, made decisions that would ruin competitors or elevate allies, watched his empire function with the precision of a machine he'd engineered, and felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. He felt weight. For the first time, power felt heavy, like carrying corpses instead of crowns. Friday night, he stood alone in his penthouse, downtown Los Angeles spread below him like conquered territory. Every light represented something he controlled or influenced or owned outright. Money, fear, respect. He'd built all of this to survive, to never be vulnerable again, to never give enemies a soft place to strike. And now? Now he had two 5-year-old girls with his eyes and his blood, living in a house with no security, no protection, their existence a secret that wouldn't stay secret. Secrets never did in his world. His phone buzzed. A message from one of his intelligence people, the ones who monitored threats. Chatter picked up. Russians asking questions about you. Personal questions. Sung-yi's blood went cold. They were probing, testing for weakness. And if they dug deep enough, if they looked in the right places, followed the right threads, they'd find Sarah. They'd find Chloe and Zoe. And then his daughters would become leverage, bargaining chips, tools to break him or bend him or bury him. The realization hit like a physical blow. The very thing he'd built to protect himself, this empire of violence and fear, was now the greatest threat to the only innocent things that carried his blood. His empire was the weapon pointed at his children's heads. Saturday morning, Sung-yi did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He drove himself. No driver, no security detail, just him and a car that couldn't be traced to his name. He parked 2 blocks from Sarah's house and watched. 7:30 a.m., Sarah emerged with the twins, loading them into a modest sedan, no armor plating, no bulletproof glass, just a regular car that would crumple like paper if someone decided to send a message. He followed at a distance. Soccer practice in a park that had zero surveillance, zero secure perimeters, zero anything that would stop a professional team from snatching two children in under 40 seconds. Sung-yi sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, and watched his daughters chase a ball across grass while his mind calculated every angle of attack, every vulnerability, every nightmare scenario his world specialized in creating. Kidnapping, ransom, torture, or worse, they wouldn't ask for anything. They'd just send him pieces. The thought made bile rise in his throat. He'd ordered violence that made grown men weep. He'd built his reputation on being the man who never flinched, never hesitated, never showed mercy when the empire demanded blood. But watching Chloe, or was it Zoe, fall and scrape her knee, watching her cry until Sarah scooped her up and kissed the hurt away, something fundamental fractured inside him. Could a man built on violence ever protect innocence? The question sat in his chest like shrapnel. Everything he'd done, every body, every betrayal, every choice that traded humanity for survival, he'd done to never be powerless again, to never be the victim, to be the one others feared instead of the one who lived in fear. But now he was terrified, not of his enemies, not of death or prison or any consequence his world could deliver. He was terrified of what his existence meant for two little girls who didn't even know his name. That night, back in his penthouse, Sung-yi pulled up files his people had compiled, Sarah's routine, the twins' school, their pediatrician, every detail of their small, unprotected life. His phone rang. Kim. "We have a problem. The Sinaloa cartel wants to renegotiate the terms. They're implying we're distracted." Distracted. The word cut like wire. "They're right," Sung-yu said quietly. "Boss? Schedule the meeting. I'll handle it." He ended the call and stared at the files spread across his desk. On one screen, security feeds from his various operations. On another, a photograph his people had taken. Sarah and the twins at a playground, laughing, alive, vulnerable. Two worlds that couldn't coexist. His empire demanded absolute focus, absolute ruthlessness. Any weakness, any distraction, and rivals would tear him apart. But his daughters, Christ, his daughters, they demanded something he'd stopped being years ago. Human, present, safe. He couldn't be both the man who ruled by fear and the man who protected innocence. One world would destroy the other. The only question was which one he'd choose to save, and how much blood that choice would cost. Sunday morning, Sung-yi made a call to his most trusted analyst, the one who tracked patterns others missed. "I need complete background on everyone within 3 blocks of an address in Pasadena, anyone with criminal history, anyone with connections to our world or rival organizations. I want to know every threat within a mile radius." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Are we protecting something?" Sung-yi closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. "What?" "Everything," he thought. "Just do it," he repeated. He ended the call and stood at his window watching his empire glitter in the darkness below him. For the first time since he'd claimed this throne, Lee Sung-yi wondered if the crown was worth wearing, or if the weight of it would crush the only things he'd never known he needed to protect. Sung-yi became a ghost in his own city, the man who commanded rooms with a glance, who never waited, who moved through the world like he owned the air itself. That man disappeared. In his place, a shadow in a parked car, a figure in sunglasses at the edge of a playground, someone who'd finally learned the difference between taking and protecting. Week 1, he simply observed. Monday through Friday, Sarah left the house at 7:15 a.m. with both girls. The drive to Pasadena Elementary took 12 minutes. She always parked in the same spot, 3 rows back from the entrance. always walked them to the gate, always knelt down for goodbye kisses, one for each daughter, before they ran inside. Then she'd sit in her car for exactly 3 minutes, head bowed, gathering herself before driving to her first job. Sung-yi had his people pull her employment records. Medical billing specialist at a clinic in Alhambra, 8-hour shifts. Then, 3 evenings a week, she worked a second job doing remote coding for a hospital network, the kind of work that paid bills but stole sleep. 2 jobs, no help, no support system he could identify. Just Sarah, carrying everything alone, the way she'd always been strong enough to do. The necklace caught his eye on Wednesday. She'd stepped out of her car at school drop-off, and sunlight hit silver at her throat. Sung-Yu's chest seized. He'd given her that necklace on her birthday, 3 months before he'd disappeared. A simple pendant, nothing extravagant, because she'd always hated flash. Just a small silver moon, because she'd once told him she did her best thinking at night, under moonlight, when the world went quiet. She still wore it. After 6 years. After everything. After he'd abandoned her pregnant and alone, she still wore the moon around her neck. Something cracked open inside him he didn't know how to seal. By week 2, he'd learned to distinguish his daughters. Chloe was the serious one. She walked with her head up, scanning, taking in information the way Sung-Yi himself did. At pickup, she always emerged from school first, looking around until she spotted Sarah's car, then waiting for her sister before approaching. Protective, observant, the guardian. Zoe bounded out like gravity was optional. She'd spot a butterfly and chase it halfway across the pickup zone before Chloe caught her hand and pulled her back. She talked constantly, hands gesturing wildly, telling Sarah elaborate stories about her day that involved epic injustices. Someone took her favorite crayon. And triumphant victories. She'd learned to spell dinosaur. Fearless, curious, the spark. Together, they were a study in balance. Chloe's caution grounding Zoe's wildness, Zoe's joy cracking Chloe's seriousness. Sung-Yi watched them like he was memorizing sacred text. The way Chloe always held Zoe's hand crossing the parking lot, the way Zoe made Chloe laugh when she got too serious, pulling faces until her sister's mouth twitched. The way they communicated in that wordless twin language, entire conversations happening in glances. His daughters. Growing up without him. Growing up better for it. Thursday afternoon, he followed them to the grocery store. Sarah looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from working 2 jobs and raising twins alone. But she let the girls pick out a cereal, debated the merits of different brands of mac and cheese, made the grocery shopping feel like an adventure instead of a chore. In the produce section, Zoe tried to juggle apples. 2 hit the floor before Chloe caught the third. Sarah laughed, actually laughed, and Sung-Yi felt the sound hit him like a physical thing. He'd forgotten that laugh. No, that was a lie. He'd buried it, along with everything else that made him weak. But watching her now, watching her create joy out of exhaustion, build a life out of nothing, raise 2 extraordinary humans with grace and strength and no help from the man who should have been there, Sung-Yi realized something fundamental. Love wasn't possession. It wasn't control or ownership or having someone because you'd claimed them. Love was this, standing in a grocery store parking lot, watching from a distance, wanting nothing except their happiness, even if that happiness didn't include him, especially if it didn't include him. Week 3, he started keeping a journal, not about territory disputes or shipment schedules, about them. Chloe likes strawberries but picks out the seeds. Zoe eats them whole. Sarah reads to them every night. Through the window, I can see them curled on the couch, same book 3 nights in a row. They must have requested it. Zoe scraped her knee at the playground, didn't cry until Sarah hugged her, like she was holding it together until it was safe to break. Chloe watches other kids' parents, studies how families work. She's figuring out what's missing, who's missing. Sarah fell asleep on the couch tonight while the girls watched a movie. Zoe covered her with a blanket. She's teaching them to be gentle, to care. I don't know how to be part of this. Don't know if I should be. For the first time in his life, Sung-yi kept a record of something that had nothing to do with power. Friday evening, 4th week, he saw something that stopped his heart. Parent-teacher conferences. Sarah emerged from the school with both girls, talking to another mother. Casual, natural. The other woman's husband appeared, scooped up their daughter, and they walked away as a unit. Sarah's smile dimmed. Not much, just a flicker, but Sung-yi had spent years reading micro-expressions, detecting weakness, finding the crack in armor. He saw her loneliness, saw how hard she worked to hide it from the girls, saw how she carried the weight of being both parents, never complaining, never asking, just enduring because that's what love demanded. And he understood, finally, what he'd done. He hadn't just walked away from Sarah. He'd condemned her to 6 years of this. Exhaustion, loneliness, raising children alone while he built an empire that meant nothing compared to this. That night, sitting in his car in the darkness, Lee Sung-yi made a decision. He couldn't force his way back into their lives, couldn't demand a place he'd forfeited, couldn't take what he had no right to claim. But he could protect them. From the shadows, from a distance, in ways they'd never know. He could learn what it meant to love without possession, to give without expecting return, to be present in absence. For the first time in his life, tower meant restraint, and restraint, he was learning, was the hardest violence he'd ever inflicted on himself. The journal entry that night was 3 words. I see you. All of you. And it's enough. It had to be. He knocked on her door at midnight. Reckless, dangerous, everything his training said not to do. But he couldn't disappear without telling her why. Couldn't vanish the way he had 6 years ago, leaving her to fill the silence with her own worst assumptions. She deserved the truth, even if the truth was uglier than any lie. Sarah opened the door, still dressed, like she'd been expecting something, or someone. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but sharp. Always sharp. It's midnight, she said quietly. The girls are asleep. I know. I'm sorry. He stopped, started again. I need to talk to you, one last time. Something in his voice made her pause. She studied his face the way she used to, reading past the arbor to the fracture lines underneath. One last time, she repeated slowly, then stepped aside. 5 minutes, outside. They sat on her porch steps in darkness punctuated by streetlights, close enough to talk, far enough to maintain the distance that had defined them for 6 years. Sun-yi didn't know how to begin, so he just began. There are people watching you. Sarah went very still. What? Russian Mafia. They've been following me for weeks. They know about you, about Chloe and Zoe. He pulled out his phone, showed her the photographs he hadn't deleted after all, couldn't delete. They sent me these. She took the phone with shaking hands, scrolled through the images, her at the grocery store, the twins at school, him watching from his car, her face drained of color in the dim light. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Why would they? Because of me. The confession felt like swallowing glass. Because I'm not just some businessman, Sarah. He stopped, forced himself to say it. I run the Korean syndicate in Los Angeles, have for 6 years. Drugs, weapons, protection, everything you're imagining and worse. I'm exactly what you were afraid I'd become. She lowered the phone. Didn't speak. That night I left, he continued, voice steady despite the earthquake inside him. My mentor was assassinated, executed in front of his family as a message. The organization was fracturing. I had to choose, step up and claim power, or watch everything burn. And you, his throat closed, you were the only weakness I had, the only soft place enemies could strike. So I walked away, cut all ties, made you disappear from my life so you could stay safe. You made that choice for me, Sarah said quietly. Yes. Without asking. Without explaining. Yes. Because you thought power was more important than... Because I thought power was the only way to survive, he interrupted, something fierce breaking through the control. I grew up watching weak men get buried, watching families destroy each other over territory, watching love become a weapon used to break people. I built an empire so I'd never be vulnerable again, so I'd never watch someone I cared about pay the price for my weakness. And now? Now the empire is the threat. Now the very thing I built to protect myself is what's putting you and the girls in danger. My enemies found you because I couldn't stay away, because I've been watching you for weeks like some lovesick fool who didn't understand that the best thing he could do for you was stay buried. Sarah was silent for a long moment, processing, then, how bad is it? Bad enough that they're sending messages, testing my limits. If I stay close to you, they'll use that leverage, kidnapping, threats. They won't hesitate to hurt children if it means breaking me. And if you disappear, then maybe they decide you're not worth the trouble, that I was just curious, sentimental, but not invested enough to matter. He met her eyes. I have to make them believe you mean nothing to me. Do we? Mean nothing? The question broke something in his chest. You mean everything, he said, voice cracking on the words. That's the problem. That's why I have to go, because staying near you, staying near them is the most selfish thing I could do. It would make me feel better while putting you all at risk. Sarah looked down at her hands, at the phone still showing photographs of her daughters playing, unaware of the predators circling. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but tears tracked silently down her face. Do you know why I left 6 years ago? You said. I said I didn't want them growing up afraid. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I loved you, Sung-yi, completely, stupidly. I would have followed you anywhere, done anything, accepted whatever life you were building. But I was pregnant with 2 lives that hadn't chosen this world, 2 innocent souls who deserved better than becoming leverage in someone else's war. So I made a choice, the same choice you're making now. I walked away from the man I loved to protect the children we made, and I spent 6 years hating you for making that choice necessary. Sarah. But I didn't hate you, she continued, voice breaking. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. It would have been easier. But I couldn't, because every time I looked at them, I saw you. Every time Chloe got that serious expression, every time Zoe laughed without fear, I saw the man you were before the world demanded you become something else. Sung-yi felt tears on his own face, unashamed. I didn't need you to be powerful, Sarah said, and the words landed like hammer blows. I needed you to be present. I needed you to choose us over the empire, over the fear, over the survival instinct that told you love was weakness. I know, he whispered. I know that now. Do you? She reached out, touched his face, the first time in 6 years. Because you're still choosing the same thing, Sung-yi. You're still walking away because you think that's strength. That's protection. What else can I do? If I stay... If you stay, we face it together. Her hand dropped. But that would require you to believe that love is stronger than fear, that being present is more powerful than being untouchable, and I don't think you're ready to believe that yet. The truth of it carved into him. I'm not asking you to stay, Sarah said softly. I'm not asking you to choose us over your empire. I'm just telling you the truth, that protection without presence is just another form of abandonment, and our daughters deserve better than a ghost father who loves them from a distance. She stood up, smoothing her clothes, composing herself. For the record, she said without turning around, I still wear the necklace because it reminds me that once, briefly, you chose to be human instead of powerful. I kept hoping you'd remember how. The door closed softly. Lee Sung-yi sat alone on the porch steps, understanding finally what he'd been too afraid to see. Love wasn't possession. It wasn't control. It was presence. And he'd spent 6 years running from the only thing that could save him. The question now was whether he had the courage to stop running, or if fear would win again.
The envelope was small, pink, the kind a child might use for a birthday party invitations. It sat on the bench at Brookside Park, the playground where Zoe had learned to swing by herself, where Chloe had scraped her knee 3 weeks ago, where Sarah brought them every Saturday morning. Sung Yi found it at dawn, before the park opened, before families arrived with their coffee and their oblivious safety. Inside, a photograph of both girls on the swings, faces blurred by motion and joy, and written in careful handwriting across the bottom, "Beautiful children, it would be a shame if something happened." No signature, no demands, just the threat, gift-wrapped in pink. Sung Yi stood in the empty playground, envelope shaking in his hands, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. They'd stopped being subtle. This wasn't psychological warfare anymore. This was a promise. The emergency meeting happened in the warehouse at 6 a.m. His key lieutenants arrived tense, armed, sensing the storm. Kim, Park, 3 others who'd killed for him, bled for him, built this empire alongside him. Sung Yi stood at the head of the table and said the words he'd never imagined speaking. "I'm stepping down." Silence crashed like thunder. Kim recovered first. "Boss, if this is about the Volkov situation, we can handle—" "It's not about handling them. It's about ending this." Sung Yi's voice was steel, wrapped in exhaustion. "I'm dismantling my position, selling territory, handing over operations. I'm out." Park's hand moved toward his weapon instinctively, then stopped. "You can't just walk away. This organization will survive without me. Has to survive without me." "Why?" Kim demanded. "After 6 years building this, after everything we've sacrificed." "Because staying means people die." Sung Yi met each man's eyes in turn. "And I'm done trading lives for power." "What people?" Kim's voice went quiet, dangerous. "What aren't you telling us?" Sung Yi could have lied, should have lied, but these men had followed him into war. They deserved the truth. "I have 2 daughters, 5 years old. The Volkovs found them, and as long as I'm in power, those girls have targets on their backs." The room went absolutely still. "You have—" Kim stopped, started again. "How long have you known?" 5 weeks, since I saw them at a mall." Sung Yi pulled out the pink envelope, slid it across the table. "This was left at their playground this morning." Park opened it, read. His jaw clenched. "We kill them all, the entire Volkov organization, send a message that—" "And then what?" Sung Yi's voice cracked. "We kill the Volkovs. The Sinaloa cartel steps up next. We eliminate them. The triads come knocking. There's always someone else, always another threat, always another reason my daughters can't sleep safe." "So you abandon everything we built?" Kim's voice was raw with betrayal. "I'm giving you everything we built. Territory, connections, supply lines, all of it. You take control, run it however you want. I'll make it official, smooth the transition, but I'm out." "They'll see it as weakness," Park said. "Rivals will circle. Blood will flow." "Then spill it without me." Sung Yi stood. "I've made my choice. Now you make yours. Stay and take what I'm offering, or walk away and watch this empire collapse into war." Kim studied him for a long moment. Then, "When?" "I start today. Full transition completed in 2 weeks. After that, my name carries no weight. I'm nobody." "You'll never be nobody," Kim said quietly. "Not in this world. Then I'll find a different world." Dismantling an empire took 14 days. Day 1 through 3, Sung-yi sold his primary operations to 3 different buyers, neutral parties who'd pay top dollar for established infrastructure. The money went into offshore accounts he'd never touch. Blood money, cursed money, money that represented every soul he'd traded for power. Day 4 through 6, territory negotiations. He divided his control among Kim and 2 rival organizations, creating a balance of power that would hold for at least a year, long enough for him to disappear completely. Days 7 through 9, he dissolved partnerships, burned bridges, eliminated connections. Every relationship he'd built through violence or fear, severed like cutting off infected limbs. Day 10, he faced men who'd followed him, who'd trusted his vision, who'd killed because he'd asked them to. Some understood, most didn't. A few swore revenge. He accepted that, added their names to the list of threats he'd created. Day 13, he liquidated assets. The penthouse, the cars, the offshore properties, everything that screamed power and untouchability. Gone. Day 14, he stood in an empty apartment that used to be his fortress and realized he'd never actually lived there, just existed between wars. Each piece he dismantled felt like tearing off skin. This empire wasn't just power, it was identity, purpose, the armor he'd worn so long it had fused to his bones. Without it, who was he? Just a man who wasted 6 years building the wrong kingdom. The final meeting was with Alexei Volkov himself. They met in neutral territory, a restaurant that served both their organizations, where violence was bad for everyone's business. Alexei was older, scarred, the kind of man who'd survived 30 decades in this world by being smart and ruthless in equal measure. "I hear you're retiring," Alexei said in accented English, stirring his coffee. "Stepping down, completely. Because the women, the children, not a question, a statement. You really would abandon everything for them?" "Yes." Alexei studied him. "That's either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. I have 4 sons, all in the family business, all targets every day of their lives. I chose power over their safety long ago, told myself I was protecting them by being strong." He sipped his coffee. "But they grew up afraid. Grew up hard, grew up like me." His eyes met Sung-yi's. "You're making a different choice. I respect that." He slid a phone across the table. "Your daughter's information, all surveillance, everything we gathered, it's deleted. They're off limits. You have my word." "Why?" "Because I remember when I could have walked away." Alexei stood, dropped cash on the table. "Before my soul forgot what that felt like." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Lee Sung-yi, you're not weak for choosing them. You're just finally strong enough to admit what matters." Then he was gone, and Sung-yi sat alone in a restaurant, holding a phone containing the only surveillance that mattered. He deleted every file. Watched the photographs disappear, Sarah at work, the girls at school, his own car watching from the shadows. Evidence of the greatest threat to his daughters? Him. Gone. That night, he stood outside Sarah's house one last time, not to watch, to say goodbye to the ghost he'd been. The man who loved from a distance, who protected through absence, who thought power meant never showing weakness. That man was dead. What came next, he didn't know. But tomorrow, he'd knock on that door not as a crime lord or a shadow or a threat, just as a father who finally learned what it meant to be present, even if presence meant risking everything he'd spent 6 years afraid to lose. The lights in the house glowed warm, and for the first time in his life, Lee Sung-yi chose the light over the darkness. He chose them over everything.
Saturday morning arrived with the kind of California sunshine that made everything feel possible. Sung-yi stood on Sarah's porch at 9 a.m., heart hammering in a way combat had never managed. He'd faced armed men without flinching, had stared down death a dozen times with cold calculation. But knocking on this door terrified him. because this time he wasn't bringing power or protection or promises wrapped in violence. He was just bringing himself, and he had no idea if that would be enough. He knocked. Footsteps inside. Sarah opened the door already dressed, like she'd been expecting him. Maybe she had been. Maybe some part of her had known he'd choose this. Her eyes searched his face. "You look different." "I am different." His voice was steady despite the earthquake inside. "I dismantled everything. The empire, the power, all of it. I'm out." "Out?" she repeated carefully. "Completely. I'm nobody now. Just..." He stopped. Started again. "Just a man who wants to meet his daughters. If you'll let me." Sarah was silent for a long moment. Behind her, he could hear cartoons playing, small voices laughing about something only children found hilarious. "They ask about you sometimes. Not by name. They don't know your name. But Chloe asks why we don't have a dad like other families. Zoe pretends she doesn't care, but I see her watching fathers at the playground, studying them like she's trying to understand what she's missing." Each word was a knife. "I can't promise I'll be good at this," Sung-yi said. "I don't know how to be a father. Don't know how to be normal. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving again. That's the only promise I can make." Sarah studied him for another heartbeat, then stepped aside. "They're in the living room. I haven't told them anything. I thought..." Her voice caught. "I thought if you were going to do this, you should be the one to tell them." Sung-yi stepped inside. The house smelled like breakfast and safety. Pictures on the walls, the girls at different ages, Sarah smiling despite exhaustion, moments of joy captured in frames. A life built without him. A life that was about to change forever. Sarah led him to the living room doorway. "Girls," she said softly, "someone's here to meet you." The cartoon volume lowered. Two identical faces turned toward him, and Lee Sung-yi looked at his daughters for the first time without glass or distance or shadows between them. Chloe sat cross-legged on the carpet, serious expression already in place, dark eyes studying him with intensity that hit like recognition. She tilted her head slightly, processing, calculating in that way that reminded him of looking in a mirror. Zoe was curled on the couch, wearing pajamas covered in dinosaurs, a stuffed bear tucked under one arm. Her expression was more open, curious, a smile already forming at the novelty of a visitor. "Hi," Zoe said brightly. "Are you Mommy's friend?" Sung-yi's throat closed. Sarah touched his shoulder gently. "I'll be in the kitchen. Take your time." Then she was gone, and he was alone with his children. He walked slowly into the room, moving carefully like approaching something precious and easily frightened. When he reached the center of the carpet, he did something he'd never done in his life. He knelt, brought himself down to their eye level, made himself small and human and vulnerable. "Hi," he said, voice rougher than he'd intended. "My name is Lee Sung-yi." Chloe, eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a Korean name. Mommy says we're half Korean." "You are. Your mother is right." "Why are you here?" Chloe asked directly. No social niceties, just the question that mattered. Sung-yi took a breath, then another, then said the words that would change everything. "I'm here because..." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I'm here because I'm your father." Silence fell like snow. Zoe sat up straighter, stuffed there forgotten. Chloe went completely still, her expression shifting through emotions too fast to track. "Our father?" Chloe repeated carefully. "Yes." "The one who isn't here?" "Yes." "The one who should have been here, who wasn't, and I..." He stopped, chest heaving. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you were born, when you learned to walk, when you lost your first teeth, when you needed someone and all you had was your mom carrying everything alone." Tears blurred his vision. He didn't wipe them away. "I made terrible choices," he continued, voice breaking. "I thought staying away would keep you safe.
I thought power was more important than presence. I was wrong about everything. And now I'm asking—" The words caught in his throat. "Asking if maybe, possibly, you'd let me try to be what I should have been in the beginning. Your father." Chloe stared at him with those eyes, his eyes, processing everything with careful consideration. "Why now?" "Because I finally understood what matters. You matter. More than anything I've ever built or owned or conquered. You matter more than fear, more than safety, more than the 1,000 excuses I used to convince myself I was protecting you by staying away." Zoe slid off the couch, still clutching her bear. She moved closer, studying him with that fearless curiosity that was pure her. "You look like us," she said. "You look like me," he corrected softly. "You have my eyes, my face. You're part of me and I'm part of you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough to say that out loud." Chloe stood up too, approaching more cautiously. She circled him slightly, examining from different angles, that serious expression locked in place. "Do you know what our favorite colors are?" she asked. The question broke him. "No," he whispered. "But I want to learn. I want to learn everything about you, what you like and what you're afraid of and what makes you laugh. I want to learn how to be your father." "Purple," Chloe said quietly. "Mine is purple. Zoe's is yellow." "Like the sun." Then softer. "Do you live with us now?" He looked toward the kitchen where Sarah stood watching, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know yet. That's something your mom and I need to talk about. But I'll be here, every day, for as long as you'll let me." Zoe took another step closer, reached out slowly, tentatively, and touched his hand. Her fingers were small, warm, real. And the walls Lee Sung-yi had spent 6 years building around his heart, walls of violence and power and emotional distance, collapsed completely. He wept. For the first time since he was a child, since before he'd learned that tears were weakness, since before the world had taught him to bury everything soft, he cried. Not quietly, not with dignity, just raw, breaking sobs that shook his entire body. Chloe watched him for a long moment, then sat down next to him. Didn't touch him yet, just sat there, present. Zoe climbed into his lap, still clutching his hand, and said the words that remade him. "It's okay. Mommy cries sometimes, too. She says crying means you feel things really hard, that it's brave." Sung-yi pulled her closer, carefully, like holding something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Chloe leaned against his shoulder, still cautious, but there. And in Sarah's living room on a Saturday morning in California, a man who ruled through fear learned what it meant to be unmade by love. "Thank you," he whispered into Zoe's hair. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "You're welcome," she said simply. Then, "Can you stay for pancakes?" He laughed through tears. "Yes, I can stay for pancakes." Chloe looked up at him. "And after pancakes?" "After pancakes, I stay for whatever comes next." "Forever?" The word hung in the air between them. Forever. He meant it.
3 weeks passed like a dream Sung-yi was afraid to wake from. He moved into a small apartment 15 minutes from Sarah's house. Nothing like the penthouse. No view of the empire he'd abandoned. Just 2 bedrooms, decent light, and proximity to the life that mattered. He learned their routines. Not from shadows this time, from inside them. Monday and Wednesday mornings, he picked up the girls for school. Chloe always checked that her backpack was zipped exactly right. Zoe always forgot something and had to run back inside, every time. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, he had dinner with them. Sarah cooked, he cleaned. They were learning to navigate the space between strangers and family. It was awkward, beautiful, terrifying. Weekends, they did normal things. Playgrounds, libraries, ice cream that melted faster than Zoe could eat it. He was learning their favorite colors, purple and yellow, seared into his memory now. Their favorite foods. Chloe liked grilled cheese with the crusts cut off. Zoe ate hers whole. The way Chloe got quiet when she was worried. The way Zoe talked faster when she was excited. He was learning to be a father. And it was harder than anything he'd ever done. Harder than building an empire. Harder than surviving in a world built on violence. Because this required something he'd never given anyone. Trust. Vulnerability. The willingness to fail in front of people who depended on him. But he was trying. And slowly, impossibly, they were becoming something that felt like family. Saturday afternoon, 4th week, they were at Brookside Park. The same playground where the pink envelope had appeared. But that felt like another lifetime now. Another version of himself he'd shed like dead skin. Zoe was on the swings, demanding he push her higher. Chloe was on the monkey bars, determined to cross all the way without help. Sarah sat on a bench reading, glancing up every few seconds with that protective mother instinct that never fully rested. Sung-yi pushed Zoe higher, listening to her shriek laugh, feeling something in his chest that might have been joy. "Higher, Daddy!" Zoe shouted. "I want to touch the sky!" Daddy. She'd started calling him that last week. Chloe still said Sung-yi or sometimes just you, but Zoe had decided he'd earned the title and she used it constantly, like she was making up for lost time. Every time she said it, something broke and rebuilt inside him simultaneously. "Any higher and you'll fly away," he said, catching the swing to slow it down. "Maybe I want to fly. Then I'd have to fly after you, and I'm not very good at flying." Zoe laughed. "You're silly." Silly? When was the last time anyone had called him silly? When was the last time he'd been anything other than dangerous? His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Probably Kim with questions about old territories, or some remnant of his past that didn't understand he was done. It buzzed again. "You should check that," Sarah called from the bench. "Might be important." Sung-yi pulled out his phone reluctantly, attention still half on Zoe swinging. Then his blood turned to ice. Unknown number. Photograph loading. The image appeared slowly, like a nightmare taking shape. Chloe and Zoe, walking out of Pasadena Elementary, yesterday, 3:25 p.m. exactly, based on the timestamp in the corner. Chloe holding Zoe's hand, both wearing the same clothes they'd worn to school. Below the image, coordinates, a date, a time, and one sentence that stopped his heart. "You can't run from your past." The playground sounds faded. The sunshine felt cold. Everything sharp and present and beautiful turned to glass about to shatter. "Sung-yi?" Sarah's voice, distant, concerned. "What's wrong?" He looked up. Sarah was standing now, reading his expression. Chloe had made it across the monkey bars and was watching him with that too perceptive gaze. Zoe had stopped swinging, sensing the change in atmosphere the way children do. "Daddy, what's wrong?" The word hit different this time. Not joy. Terror. Because someone was watching his daughters. Someone had been close enough to photograph them. Someone from his past who didn't accept that he'd walked away. His first instinct was familiar, old, violent. Find them, eliminate the threat, go to war with everything he'd once commanded, call Kim, mobilize his old connections, burn down anyone who dared threaten his family. The instinct surged through him like muscle memory. His hand moved towards his phone, ready to make calls that would end in blood. Then stopped. Because going to war meant becoming what he'd walked away from, meant teaching his daughters that violence was how you solved problems, meant building walls again instead of bridges, meant choosing the old way over the new path he'd barely started walking. Sarah reached him, saw the phone screen. Her face went pale. "Is that yesterday?" Someone's still watching. Who? I don't know. And that was the terrifying truth. He'd made so many enemies, burned so many bridges. It could be anyone with a grudge and the resources to make good on it. What do we do? Sarah's voice was steady, but she saw fear underneath. The same fear he'd put there 6 years ago by being what he was. Sung-yi looked at his daughters. Chloe had moved closer, protective instinct kicking in, placing herself between Zoe and whatever threat she sensed. Zoe clutched her stuffed bear tighter, big eyes locked on him, waiting for him to fix this, to protect them, to be the father he'd promised to be. And he realized something fundamental. He couldn't fight this the old way. The old way, violence, power, elimination, that was what created the cycle. That was what made his daughters targets in the first place. That was the world he'd walked away from. If he picked up those weapons again, he'd become the very threat he was trying to protect them from. So he made a different choice. He knelt down in front of both girls, bringing himself to their eye level, put the phone away, made himself present instead of preparing for war. Listen to me, both of you. Something's happening that I need to handle, but I need you to know something important. Chloe's expression was serious, scared. Are we in danger? He wouldn't lie to them. Maybe. I don't know yet. But I promise you, I'm going to keep you safe. Not by running away this time, not by disappearing, by being here, by being smart, by doing this the right way. What's the right way? Zoe whispered. The way that doesn't make me into something you'll be afraid of. He looked at Sarah. The way that doesn't repeat the cycle that put us here. Sarah understood. You're not going back. No, he said, resolve hardening into something different than the old strength. Something that didn't require blood to hold shape. Then what are you doing? I'm calling the people I still trust. Kim, a few others who aren't dirty. I'm using connections without becoming what I left behind. He pulled Sarah and both girls closer. And I'm doing what I should have done 6 years ago. I'm staying. I'm fighting for this family. But I'm fighting smart, not violent. A text arrived. Same unknown number. We'll be in touch. Enjoy your family while you can. Sung-yi deleted it without responding. Because responding meant engaging, meant playing the game by rules that benefited them. Instead, he looked at the 3 people who'd remade him in less than a month. Sarah, who survived 6 years alone because she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. Chloe, who was already trying to figure out the problem, little mind working through scenarios. Zoe, who trusted him completely, despite having every reason not to. I need to make some calls, set up protection that doesn't look like prison. But tonight, we're going home, we're having dinner, we're being a family, because that's what they want to take from us, and I won't give them that power. And tomorrow? Sarah asked. Tomorrow, I figure out who's threatening my family, and I stop them. Not the old way. A better way. What if there isn't a better way? He looked at his daughters, at the life he'd chosen over power. Then I'll invent one. That night, after the girls were asleep, Sung-yi sat with Sarah at her kitchen table. I don't know if I can do this. Fight threats without becoming what I was. Protect without power. Be present without guarantees. No one knows if they can, Sarah said. That's what makes it brave. I'm terrified. Good. Fear means you understand what you have to lose. He looked towards the stairs where his daughters slept safe for tonight. Tomorrow was uncertain. The threat was real. The past was circling. But for the first time in his life, Lee Sung-yi was facing danger without reaching for a weapon. He was facing it with love as his shield. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. The phone buzzed one more time. He turned it off without looking. Whatever came next, he'd face it. But not tonight. Tonight, he was just a father sitting in a kitchen, learning what it meant to be present. Even when presence meant walking into the unknown. Especially then.